I think we think that we know what love looks like, especially, once we've been a Christian for a while, we feel like we have a pretty good handle on it. But as we've looked through this series and we've seen what Jesus did and how he loved us on and leading up to the cross, even in the midst of all of the suffering that he faced, I think that should shake our definition of love. Today we're going to explore what did he do and how should it change the way that we think about love and what it means to relate to God and to relate to others. Hi, I'm Joseph Walter, and this is my wife Monica, and we're on Loving Theology today, and we're talking about our series that I've called His Final Hours. And in this series, what we did was we went through and we looked at Jesus' final hours leading up to the cross, and what happened to him, and how did he carry himself through it. And we saw some incredible things. We saw the way that he was betrayed by Judas, and also by the Jewish religious leaders. And then the way that he was abandoned by Peter, his closest friend probably, and the way that even all of his disciples abandoned him. And also the physical suffering that he endured on the cross, the beatings, the abuse, and the crucifixion itself. And throughout all of that, we can see the incredible hardship that he endured. But the way that he carried himself through it, I think is what astonished me. The way that he loved people through the midst of that was incredible. I mean, he loved people that he was just meeting for the first time, just sort of passing by, like Pilate whenever he witnessed to him. Or the way that he loved his disciples and his friends, even though he knew that they were going to abandon him, the way that he encouraged them, comforted them, and tried to help them so that they would be able to withstand the temptation to fall away. And then also the way that he even loved Judas, and the one that would betray him, and he knew that he would betray him, but he still washed his feet, he still cared for him, he still loved him. Mm-hmm. And it was incredible to see the way that he loved on his worst day. I don't think I could have loved that way on my best day, but he did it literally on his worst. And I think that says something, that shows us something that, like I said, should probably shake our definition of love, make us question, how do we understand love? I think as we redefine that today, and as we look at how do we love like Jesus did, I think that it can change the way that we think about it, what it means to be loved by God, and also change what it means to be loving towards others.
I wanted to make the point of how we are actually able to follow in Jesus' footsteps. When we call ourselves followers of Jesus, we are actually, he has given us the Holy Spirit so that we can follow in his steps. It's not this impossible life because we have the Spirit in us. And I think believing in that truth, we can actually feel encouraged to, see all of these stories that we see, and we're like, oh, that's so incredible of him to have done. I could never do that. The reality is that we can, and he asks us to do that. So we want to talk about a few examples where we can, love others the way Jesus did.
Yeah, I think that the idea is that whenever you see the way that Jesus loved, it's meant to be an inspirational picture. Mm-hmm. And the key is in that word inspirational. In other words, it's meant to inspire a response. Mm-hmm. Like that we feel motivated and inspired to do what Jesus did. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of what Jesus did where whenever you see it, you go, wow, okay, that is loving. Mm-hmm. But I think the part that maybe I don't feel like I can imitate, if I'm honest, is that he does this on his bad day. On his bad days. I've never had bad days like Jesus was having at that point. Yeah. And even on my, by comparison then, even on my less good days, because by comparison, that's all I've had, is I still am not loving like that. Mm-hmm. I lose my patience with, Monica or the kids, just because I'm stressed out about something or other, mm-hmm. Or whatever it is. I lose my patience all too easily. Just maybe I'm hurting about something, maybe it's a little bit of a bigger deal, and I'm really actually going through something. And that's whenever I'm just like, no, we're not going to talk about what you need to talk about right now, because I'm going through something. I'm a closed door right now. If you're going through something, I've got something bigger going on right now. So you deal with you, because I'm dealing with something right now. I need some time. And yes, there's a role for, taking time to ourselves. Jesus even did it to where he drew alone to pray. But what I'm getting at is that these were his toughest hours, way tougher than anything that I've faced. And still in the midst of it, he was encouraging his disciples. He was comforting them. He was witnessing to people along the way. The way that he was loving, even in those times, is the part that I feel is really difficult to imitate. Yeah. And I think that as we think about how do we do that, I think the answer has to come from life by the Spirit, which is, Romans 8 talks about this, where basically we rely on the Spirit to be able to do this. I think some of it comes in the picture of what Jesus went through in the Garden of Gethsemane.
Yeah.
Because Jesus went to the Garden of Gethsemane before a lot of this happened. Not all of it, because we did talk about some of the things that happened before the garden. But before a lot of what he went through, he went to the Garden of Gethsemane. And Hebrews tells us that the Lord heard his prayer, and that his prayer was answered because of his reverence. And that answer, which is told in Luke, is that an angel came to him and strengthened him. And I think that in the place of prayer, God is there to strengthen us so that we can love like that. So I think, sort of the picture for me in terms of making this practical is in those bad days, we can't use that as an excuse anymore.
Yeah.
And I, if I'm honest, I do use it as an excuse to be a little less than loving. Whether that's towards my neighbors, towards my family, my wife, or just towards random people I'm passing by.
Yeah.
Where I'm more focused on myself than I am on ways to be outwardly focused.
Yeah.
I think that Jesus' picture tells us that we can't use that as an excuse anymore.
Yeah.
But his example of how we do that isn't absent self-care. There still is a place where we get to go before the Lord and pray and work through those things. But it's with an attitude towards, God, give me the strength to be loving to others, even in the midst of this, even though I'm going through something difficult. And that example, I think, is the picture of where I think Jesus' example really challenges us to be loving in all things, always.
Yeah.
And it's, to be honest, if it feels like it's beyond your ability, it feels like it's beyond mine, that's because it is.
Yeah.
And that's why we need to look outside of our ability and lean on the strength that the Lord has for us in the place of prayer, like I said earlier, where he wants to strengthen us and encourage us so that we can be loving even on our bad days.
We can still live that way,
Right.
and keeping in a place of prayer so that we can go out into this world and live just as loving as Jesus did. But I did want to go over the part about where Judas, Jesus is washing his feet. Jesus knows. He knows what's about to happen, and he knows who's going to do it. And yet we talked about how he took just as much time and love and care on everyone. I don't think he discriminated on Judas's feet and just did a quick wash job.
Right.
Because he's
Sprinkle
like,
some water.
I
All
know.
right, you
Yeah.
can move on.
Yeah.
Next.
I think just knowing Jesus, that he washed his feet just as much, and that he knew this can almost seem like maybe when we have a friend that we know that they're probably going to come and hurt us again, and they're maybe an inconvenient friend where it's a difficult relationship, that we can, and through the Spirit, still have the power to love them fully and not treat them differently because we know the way that they are and they're difficult, that we treat them as Judas was treated by Jesus. And I think that's such a perfect example to those people that are just very difficult, and we know that they might still be difficult ongoing. They might ask for forgiveness, but we know it might just be words or whatever. We still can love them, and Jesus shows us how to.
Yeah, I mean, the way that he, it's in the middle of, Judas betraying him that he calls him friend still.
Yeah.
And, I think that, we talked about this, that I think that sometimes we imagine that Jesus wasn't really good friends with Judas, that he kind of kept his guard up a little bit. But I think that, if anything, this is the example that he didn't.
Yeah.
He continued to love and serve him even while in the middle of the fact that Judas was betraying him, the fact that Judas was hurting him.
Yeah, I think it shows that, if we've been given this Spirit that, Jesus had to be able to do that and to not, he didn't put up a wall, that we can also just live in a place of confidence and hope and peace in who we are, and extend ourselves even to the people that we know are going to continuously hurt us. And we're going to be just fine, and we can have peace in that.
Yeah, it's that picture, I think it's the perfect picture of that moment where, Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount, he says, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye. But I tell you that if someone slaps you on your right cheek, turn to him the other also. And it's just that picture of being willing to love your enemy, to really truly serve them. And I think that there's a lot to that maybe we can unpack in a series at some point. Just kind of what that looks like to really love your enemy. But maybe we'll get into that later. Something else too is witnessing on its own is difficult for me, to unbelievers. I mean, in terms of sharing my faith and knowing exactly how to do it. A lot of times, I want to do a series on this too, to sort of talk about what that looks like and what it means to be a city set on a hill. But as I think about witnessing, those are the times that are difficult for me. And then when I think about the fact that Jesus was witnessing to Pilate, even in the midst of his bad day, and also knowing that Pilate was ultimately going to be the one to sentence him to crucifixion, not because Pilate wanted to, we can see that in the story, but throughout the process, we talked about this, how Jesus basically, I think partially, at least maybe even fully convinced Pilate of who he was, that he was the King of the Jews, and that maybe even he was the Son of God. And I think that the fact that he went through that and that he was focused on witnessing, even in that context, challenges us again to be willing to do that even on our bad days. Because my worst day, like I said earlier, is still just simply a less good day by comparison to what Jesus was going through. And still in that moment, he was witnessing. And so again, I just think that it kind of removes that excuse that maybe sometimes we have, because we all have good days, we all have bad days. But we're called to be loving. We're called to be loving even to unbelievers in that sense, which is witnessing, in the proper way and with love in our heart towards them. We're called to do that even on the days that are difficult for us. Yeah.
And I wanted to say one more point where I think one of the biggest ways is really we see the soldiers are mocking him. I mean, they're just laughing at him, making this historical moment, this huge spiritual moment, and just tearing Jesus to shreds, in every way that they can, spitting in his face,
beating him, making the crown of thorns, everything that they did. It was, like I said, entirely their own invention.
They're just doing this for fun, They're abusing him, and I just think, those slashes, just picturing that is just awful. I couldn't imagine ever going through pain that much. And I just think if Jesus could sit there and forgive them, this picture, and I've talked about this before in my past and going through abuse, that I think that is his heart to extend forgiveness and to have mercy on even those that had abused him, and I mean in such an awful way, that he is, that is his heart. His heart was compassion for them. His heart was, to ask for forgiveness because they know not what they're doing. That he wanted not just to forgive them, but he wanted them to have peace with God one day. That was his desire, and that's his heart. And I think that as I've gone through life and I've had to face, forgiving, people that have hurt me, that was such an enlightening moment for me, was to see not only do I need to forgive them because unforgiveness is bad for me to hold, okay, so I did that, but I got to the point where I was praying for these people, because in the end, that's God's heart, is that all of us, come to him, that all of us come to know him and the truth and to live in freedom. And in the end, anyone that is hurting, I mean, we've heard of hurt people,
sure,
but anyone that is hurting, most likely they have so much pain and so many things going on in themselves that they need mercy, they need prayer, and they need it just as much as I did for what I went through.
Yeah, I think that, this is something that you've talked about before that I think is just part of your own story, that is just such an incredible picture that Jesus portrayed here, that I think that you did a good job portraying too, is that he didn't simply forgive the soldiers. He wanted God to forgive them. And it's just, he wanted them to be reconciled to the Father. That's love. And it's the people who, like I said, they were enjoying abusing him. They were making up, inventing ways to abuse him and to mock him and to hurt him.
Yeah.
And still, in that context, he was desiring that they should be reconciled to God, saying, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they're doing.
And I was just thinking that all of this was prophecy, prophesied before. Jesus knew, he's all-knowing, but like he knew he was walking into the abuse. Mm-hmm. And he still chose. And I think of just like my own story, like where I am now and like where the relationship I have with the Lord, that even when people hurt us, that Jesus chose to go through all that because he knew what it would mean in the end, and that it would be better. And I think that that's just such a redeeming story. Like the Lord can redeem any and all situations, for each one of us, as we're facing things like from our past or any sort of pain.
Yeah, I think that is such a good example of redemption. And it reminds me of the verse where he says, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. And I think that there's some comfort in that whenever we have gone through difficult things, we can look back and say, for the joy set before us, I would have endured that again.
Yeah.
And, we can then hopefully, and this is some of that picture from Romans 5:3-5 that talks about as we do that more and more, it builds this character in us that builds this expectation of hope.
Yeah.
And when we have that expectation of hope, what that means is that then even whenever it's something that we don't fully know the outcome, we can still have hope because we know who God is. That's what that concept of character is that we know we have that confidence in who he is.
Yeah.
And as a result, we can, for the joy set before us, endure whatever we're facing in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
So hopefully this discussion today has helped to make this series something practical for you, where you can see the way that this can change how we receive God's love and how we walk in love towards others. Mm-hmm. And I hope that this has done that for you. We'll put a link for the whole series below in case you missed one or another of the posts, so that you can kind of watch it all in context and really get to see what Jesus did and some of these examples that we're talking about in a little bit more detail. And there's other examples that we have that we didn't bring up here, obviously, just in this short discussion. And then also, like I said earlier, I really want to transition us into the next series that I think you'll really love, where we see what it means to have a quiet time. I'm calling it Make Room to Be Refreshed. And what I want us to see in it is that our quiet times are a place where Jesus isn't looking to be served, but he's looking to serve. Mm-hmm. That the same way that he carried himself throughout all of this, where he was looking to serve rather than be served, that's exactly what he does for us still today in our quiet times. Yeah. Those are the times where he serves us. And I want to maybe flip our perspective there a little bit and maybe even help to change our motivation for going into quiet times and spending time with God. And I think that there's something in us for that. I think it's something that will be helpful to you. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so that you don't miss it. And either way, I appreciate you spending time with us today. Hopefully this has been helpful to you. And thank you for joining us.